The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains, causing Delilah Barton to flinch as she crouched behind the worn-out wagon wheel. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and what had started as a peaceful journey to Tucson had turned into a nightmare when a band of outlaws ambushed their wagon train. Her father, once the fastest gun in the West, lay wounded beside her. His weathered face contorted in pain as he pressed a bloodied handkerchief against his shoulder. "Keep your head down, Delilah," Samuel Barton wheezed, his once booming voice now barely audible over the chaos around them. At 21, Delilah had seen her fair share of hardship on the frontier, but nothing had prepared her for this moment, watching her invincible father bleed while outlaws picked off their traveling companions one by one. The sound of hoofbeats thundered nearby, and she tightened her grip on her father's old Colt revolver, determined to go down fighting if need be. Another shot rang out, followed by a pained cry, but this time, it wasn't from their side. More gunfire erupted, but the pattern had changed. Someone else had joined the fray. "Hang on there," a deep voice called out. "I've got them on the run." Through the settling dust, Delilah glimpsed a tall figure on horseback, firing with deadly precision at the retreating outlaws. The stranger dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He moved toward them, rifle still at the ready as he surveyed the scene. "Name's Clayton Eastwood," he said, pushing back his hat to reveal piercing blue eyes set in a sun-bronzed face. "Looks like I arrived just in time." Delilah assessed him quickly, mid-20s, broad-shouldered, with a seriousness in his eyes that spoke of experiences beyond his years. He wasn't dressed like a typical gunslinger. His clothes were simple but well-maintained, with a silver badge pinned to his vest. "Deputy Marshal," he explained, following her gaze to the badge. "Was tracking those outlaws when I heard the commotion." He knelt beside her father, examining the wound with practiced hands. "This needs proper tending, but your lucky bullet went straight through." "My daughter can patch me up," Samuel insisted, his pride still intact despite his weakened state. "She's got healing hands, this one." Clayton's eyes met Delilah's, and something unspoken passed between them, a moment of mutual assessment, respect forming in the crucible of danger. "I've got a cabin not far from here," he offered. "Safe from those who might return. I can help you get him there." Delilah hesitated only briefly before nodding. With the other travelers either dead or scattered, they had few options. "Thank you, Deputy." Within an hour, they had reached Clayton's modest cabin nestled against a rocky hillside. It was simple but sturdy, with a small corral attached where his chestnut mare now rested alongside their surviving wagon horse. Inside, Delilah worked quickly to clean and bandage her father's wound, grateful for the supplies Clayton provided. Samuel drifted into a fitful sleep shortly after, exhausted from blood loss and pain. "You've done this before," Clayton observed quietly as she washed blood from her hands in a basin. "When you grow up with the singing gunfighter of Dodge City, as your pa, you learn to tend wounds," Delilah replied, a hint of wry humor in her voice despite their circumstances. Clayton's eyebrows rose. "Samuel Barton is the singing gunfighter? I've heard stories, but they're mostly true," she interrupted with a small smile. "Though he's hung up his performing days. Just a rancher now, or was, until our place burned in that drought last season. We were heading to Tucson to start over." As night fell, they sat by the fireplace, speaking in hushed tones to avoid disturbing Samuel's rest. Clayton explained he'd been a deputy marshal for only a year, having previously worked as a cowhand on various ranches throughout the territory. "What about you?" he asked. "Besides being the daughter of a legend." Delilah tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I keep the books, tend wounds, and occasionally sing when Pa needs cheering up. Not much else to tell." "You sing?" Interest sparked in his eyes. She nodded, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing fancy. Just songs my mother taught me before she passed. I'd like to hear that sometime, Clayton said, his voice soft with genuine curiosity rather than mere politeness. Days stretched into a week as Samuel's fever broke and his strength gradually returned. Delilah fell into a comfortable routine with Clayton. She'd cook meals from their combined supplies while he handled chores around the cabin and kept watch for any sign of the outlaws' return. In the evenings, he'd sometimes read from one of the few books he owned, his deep voice bringing the words to life in a way that made Delilah look forward to nightfall. On the 8th day, while Samuel dozed in the afternoon sun on the small porch, Clayton approached Delilah as she hung laundry to dry. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Once your father's well enough to travel, where will you go?" Delilah's hands stilled on the damp fabric. "Tucson, I suppose. That was the plan." "What's waiting for you there?" "Nothing," she admitted. "No one. Just the possibility of something new." Clayton stepped closer, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something more vulnerable. "The marshal's office in Silver Creek, that's the town about 15 miles south of here, they need someone to keep their books, organize their notices. Pays decent. And—" He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "There's a small ranch for sale nearby. Nothing fancy, but good water, decent grazing. I've been saving to make an offer." Delilah's heart quickened. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Deputy Eastwood?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'm suggesting possibilities, Miss Barton, for you and your father. Silver Creek could use a man with experience, and there's no lawman's badge that can't be polished by having the singing gunfighter offering occasional advice." "And what would Silver Creek offer me?" she asked, meeting his gaze steadily. "A fresh start, community, and—" He hesitated again. "Someone who'd very much like to hear you sing, whenever you might be inclined." Before Delilah could respond, her father's voice carried from the porch. "Delilah, come here, darling." She excused herself, moving to Samuel's side. "Yes, Pa?" Samuel's eyes, clear now that the fever had passed, looked knowingly between his daughter and the deputy who had retreated to give them privacy. "That young man's sweet on you." "Pa, he's just being kind," Delilah protested, though the warmth in her cheeks betrayed her. "I may be old, but I ain't blind," Samuel chuckled. "Known it since that first night when he kept watching you tend my wound like you were performing some kind of miracle." He reached for her hand, his grip still weak but improving daily. "You like him too. Seen you stealing glances when you think I'm napping." Delilah couldn't deny it. In the short time they'd spent together, Clayton had shown himself to be honorable, capable, and surprisingly thoughtful. She'd found herself drawn to his quiet strength and the gentle way he spoke to her, treating her as an equal rather than someone to be protected or pitted. "Sing for me, would you?" Samuel asked suddenly, changing the subject. "Here? Now?" He nodded. "That song your mother used to sing. The one about the prairie sky." Delilah glanced toward Clayton, who was now brushing down his horse by the corral, out of earshot. "Don't worry about him hearing," Samuel said, reading her hesitation. "Man should know what he's getting himself into." He winked. "Besides, your pa smiles bigger when you sing." With a deep breath, Delilah began to sing softly at first, then with growing confidence as the familiar melody carried her away. It was a sweet, simple song about finding home beneath the endless western sky, but in her clear voice, it became something transcendent. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Clayton approach until the last note faded. When she looked up, he was standing at the edge of the porch, his expression one of undisguised wonder. "That was beautiful," he said simply. Samuel cleared his throat. "Deputy, if you're still offering those possibilities you mentioned to my daughter, I'd like to hear more about this Silver Creek place." 2 days later, they loaded their meager belongings into Clayton's wagon. The journey to Silver Creek was uneventful, the landscape gradually changing from rocky hills to rolling grasslands dotted with cottonwoods as they approached the small settlement nestled in a gentle valley. Silver Creek proved to be larger than Delilah had imagined, a proper town with a main street lined with wooden buildings, including a general store, a small hotel, a church, and the marshal's office where Clayton reported. Several dozen houses and farms spread outward from this center, with the sounds of children playing and livestock lowing, creating a tapestry of community life that Delilah had missed during their years on the isolated ranch. Marshal Jim Holloway, a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper beard, welcomed them warmly, especially when Clayton explained Samuel's identity. "The singing gunfighter, right here in my office," he exclaimed, pumping Samuel's hand enthusiastically. "My stars, the stories I've heard." When Clayton proposed that Delilah help organize the office's paperwork, Marshal Holloway agreed immediately. "Lord knows we need it," he admitted, gesturing to the chaotic stacks of wanted posters and correspondence littering every surface. "Been meaning to hire someone with a head for figures and neat handwriting." They settled into a rhythm in Silver Creek. Samuel's reputation opened doors, and he soon found himself offering advice to the town council on security matters. His strength returned gradually, though Delilah noticed he tired more easily than before, a reality he grudgingly acknowledged but refused to let define him. Delilah excelled at her work in the marshal's office, transforming the chaotic record-keeping into an organized system that earned her praise from both lawmen and town officials. She found satisfaction in the work, especially when her efforts helped connect pieces of information that led to the capture of a cattle rustler who had plagued the region for months. Clayton divided his time between deputy duties and improvements on the small ranch he'd purchased on the town's outskirts. True to his word, it was modest but promising, 20 acres with a cabin that needed work but had solid bones, a good well, and enough grazing land for a small herd. Throughout those first weeks, Clayton and Delilah's relationship evolved slowly, built on shared meals, conversations on the porch of the boarding house where she and Samuel had taken rooms, and occasional rides to inspect his property. He never pushed, never presumed, but his interest was clear in the way his eyes sought hers across a room. In the small gifts he would bring: a ribbon for her hair, a journal with blank pages when he noticed her old one was nearly full. One evening in late summer, as they walked back from a town social where Delilah had been persuaded to sing for the gathered residents, Clayton finally spoke of what had been building between them. "I never expected to find someone like you," he said as they paused by the small bridge spanning the creek that gave the town its name. Stars reflected in the gently flowing water below, mirroring the sky above. "When I rode after those outlaws that day, I was just doing my job. Never imagined it would change everything." Delilah studied his face in the moonlight. "And has it? Changed everything?" "You know it has." He took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I've been working on the cabin. Added a second bedroom for your father. Expanded the porch so it catches the sunset just right. There's space for a garden out back. Good soil." "Are you asking me something, Clayton Eastwood?" Her voice was teasing, but her heart pounded against her ribs. "I'm asking if you might consider making a more permanent home in Silver Creek. With me." His eyes never left hers. "I'm not a wealthy man, and I can't promise it'll always be easy, but I can promise to work hard, to be honest, and to listen every time you feel moved to sing." Delilah smiled, squeezing his hand. "I think I'd like that very much." Their courtship continued through the autumn, becoming a favorite topic of Gentletown gossip. Samuel, for his part, gave his blessing without hesitation, telling Clayton privately that he'd never seen a man look at my daughter the way you do, like she's both sunrise and sunset in one person. In October, tragedy nearly derailed their happiness when the outlaws who had ambushed them months earlier returned to the area, robbing the Silver Creek Bank and shooting Marshal Holloway in the process. Though the marshal survived, the attack left the town shaken and Clayton determined to bring the criminals to justice. "I have to go after them," he told Delilah the night after the robbery, his expression grim as he prepared to join a posse. "They've hurt too many people." Fear gripped her heart, memories of her father's blood-soaked shirt vivid in her mind. "I know you do," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "Just come back to me. Always," he promised, kissing her with a tenderness that contrasted with the steel in his eyes. For 10 agonizing days, Delilah waited, throwing herself into caring for Marshal Holloway and keeping the office running in Clayton's absence. Each night, she would sing softly to herself, the same songs her mother had taught her, finding comfort in the familiar melodies when worry threatened to overwhelm her. On the 11th day, as she was closing the office for the evening, hoofbeats sounded on the street. She rushed outside to see Clayton dismounting, dusty and exhausted but whole. Behind him rode the rest of the posse, escorting 3 bound men, the outlaws who had terrorized so many. "You're back," she breathed, restraining herself from running to him in full view of the gathering townspeople. "Told you I would be," he replied with a tired smile. That night, after the prisoners were secured and reports filed, Clayton joined Delilah and Samuel for dinner at the boarding house. As they ate, he recounted the pursuit across rough country, the firefight that had resulted in the death of one outlaw and the capture of the others, and the recovery of most of the stolen money. When the meal was finished and they sat drinking coffee, Clayton reached into his pocket and placed a small wooden box on the table between them. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes. "After what happened, I don't want to wait anymore." Samuel discreetly excused himself, patting Clayton's shoulder as he passed. With trembling fingers, Delilah opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single small pearl. "It was my mother's," Clayton explained. "She gave it to me before she passed. Said to save it for when I found someone who made me feel like I'd found home." "And have you," Delilah asked softly, "found home?" "I have," he replied without hesitation. "It's wherever you are, Delilah Barton. Will you marry me?" The winter wedding was small but joyous, held in the Silver Creek Church on a clear December day. Delilah wore a dress of deep blue that Clayton said matched the evening sky, with her mother's locket at her throat and wildflowers in her hair despite the season. Samuel gave her away with tears in his eyes, looking stronger than he had in months, his voice carrying clear and strong when he spoke the traditional words. Later, at the celebration in the town hall, he surprised everyone by performing one of his old songs, his rich baritone reminding all present why he'd earned his famous nickname. As the evening progressed, 7-year-old Emily Wilson, daughter of the town's schoolteacher, approached Delilah shyly. "Mrs. Eastwood?" she asked, the new name still sounding strange and wonderful to Delilah's ears. "Could you sing for us, please? I heard you at the social last summer, and it was so pretty." Before Delilah could respond, Emily added earnestly, "Pa smiles bigger when you do. He told me so." Clayton, overhearing as he approached with 2 glasses of punch, laughed softly. "She's right, you know. Everyone does." With a smile, Delilah moved to the front of the room where a piano stood. The gathered townspeople quieted as she began to sing a song about journeys ended and begun, about finding shelter from the storm and strength in loving arms. Her clear voice filled the space, and when she looked out at the faces watching her, she saw her father and her new husband standing side by side, both smiling just as Emily had described. Spring brought new beginnings to the Eastwood Ranch. The cabin renovations were complete, with curtains Delilah had sewn hanging in the windows and a garden plot turning green with early vegetables. Samuel had his own room but spent most days in town, having been appointed as a special advisor to the town council on matters of security and development. Clayton's small herd had grown with the addition of several calves, promising future prosperity if the weather held and markets remained favorable. More importantly, Delilah discovered in April that they would be welcoming a child of their own by year's end, news that left Clayton speechless with joy when she told him. "A baby?" he marveled, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though his radiant expression already answered her question. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her, gathering her into his arms. "When I rode into that gunfight last year, I was just doing what needed doing. Had no idea I was riding toward the rest of my life." Their happiness was tempered only by concern for Samuel, whose health had begun to decline again as summer approached. The wound he'd suffered during the ambush had never fully healed properly, and the town doctor suspected internal damage that continued to trouble him. "Don't you worry about me," Samuel insisted whenever Delilah expressed concern. "I've lived a full life, seen my share of sunrises and sunsets. Now I get to see my daughter happy and settled, with a grandchild on the way. That's more than many men get." Despite his brave words, Delilah and Clayton made arrangements for Samuel to see a specialist in Tucson, hoping modern medical knowledge might offer solutions the small-town doctor couldn't provide. The journey was planned for early September, when the worst summer heat had passed but before Delilah's pregnancy made travel too difficult. As they prepared for the trip, an unexpected letter arrived from Dodge City. One of Samuel's old partners, Thomas Jenkins, had tracked him down with news. The governor was pardoning several men Samuel had helped bring to justice years ago, including one who had sworn vengeance. "You should stay here," Clayton urged when Samuel shared the news. "Let me handle this. I can speak to the marshal in Dodge. Make sure they're watching for any trouble." Samuel shook his head firmly. "I won't live in fear, son. Never have, never will. Besides, this changes nothing. I still need to see that doctor in Tucson." They compromised by arranging for additional security during their journey. Marshal Holloway would accompany them personally, along with another deputy. The plans were kept quiet, with only a few trusted townspeople aware of their departure date. The day before they were to leave, Delilah found her father sitting on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset with a peaceful expression. "Would you sing for me, darling?" he asked as she settled beside him. "That new song you've been working on. It's not finished yet," she protested mildly. "Don't matter. I just like to hear your voice. Reminds me of your mother." With a soft smile, Delilah began to sing the lullaby she'd been composing for her unborn child, a gentle melody about stars guiding the way home and love lasting through generations. As the last notes faded into the twilight, she noticed tears trailing silently down her father's weathered cheeks. "Pa, are you all right?" He nodded, covering her hand with his. "Just proud, that's all. Proud of the woman you've become, the life you've built. Your mother would be too. We wouldn't have this life if not for you," she reminded him. "Clayton might never have found us if we hadn't been on that road when we were." Samuel chuckled. "Fate has its ways. Speaking of your husband, where is he?" "Final check with the marshal about tomorrow's arrangements," Delilah explained. "He's being extremely cautious." "Good man," Samuel nodded approvingly. "He loves you something fierce, Delilah. Never doubt that." "I don't," she assured him, leaning her head against his shoulder as they watched the last light fade from the sky. The journey to Tucson began smoothly the next morning, their small wagon train consisting of Clayton and Delilah's wagon, Marshal Holloway on horseback, and Deputy Wilson riding alongside. Samuel insisted on riding his own horse despite his weakened condition, claiming the fresh air did him good. They were 2 days into their journey when disaster struck. A sudden summer storm forced them to seek shelter in an abandoned way station just off the main trail. As they hurried to secure their horses and belongings against the howling wind, they failed to notice another group of riders approaching until it was too late. "Barton!" A harsh voice called out over the wind. "Samuel Barton, I know you're in there." Clayton immediately positioned himself at a window, rifle ready. "5 men," he reported tensely. "Armed." Marshal Holloway joined him, peering through a gap in the shutters. "That's Jackson Miller leading them," he said grimly. "Released from Yuma prison last month. Mean as a rattler and twice as deadly." Samuel's face hardened with recognition. "He swore he'd see me dead for testifying against him. Put away for killing that family in '68. "You stay back," Clayton told both Delilah and Samuel firmly. "Wilson, watch the rear door." The standoff lasted through the storm, with occasional shots exchanged but no clear advantage gained by either side. As night fell and the storm passed, Miller called out again. "Send out the singing gunfighter and the rest of you can ride away. Otherwise, none of you leave alive come morning." Clayton and the marshal exchanged grim looks, calculating their options. The way station offered decent cover but little in the way of supplies or escape routes. Eventually, they would be overwhelmed by superior numbers. "I'll go," Samuel said suddenly, his voice steady despite the pallor of his face. "No," Delilah protested. "There has to be another way." Samuel took her hands in his. "Listen to me. I'm dying anyway, darling. The doc in town confirmed it last month that bullet did more damage than we thought. Internal bleeding that can't be fixed." Shock rendered Delilah speechless as her father continued. "I didn't want to worry you, especially with the baby coming. Was hoping to last until I could hold my grandchild. But..." He shrugged with forced casualness. "A man doesn't always get what he hopes for." Clayton stepped forward. "Samuel will figure something out. You're not sacrificing yourself." A calculating look entered Samuel's eyes. "Actually, I have a plan that might work. But I'll need your help, Deputy." He glanced at Delilah. "And yours too, darling. One last performance from the singing gunfighter and his daughter." As Samuel outlined his strategy, Delilah's protest died on her lips. It was dangerous, perhaps foolhardy, but it offered a chance that simple surrender did not. And seeing the determined gleam in her father's eye, a spark of the legendary gunfighter he had once been, she couldn't bring herself to deny him this final act of courage. The plan relied on distraction and precision timing. Shortly before dawn, Delilah would begin singing from within the way station loud enough to carry to Miller and his men. The sound would draw their attention while Clayton and Marshal Holloway repositioned themselves outside using a storm cellar exit Samuel had spotted earlier. Samuel himself would appear to surrender, walking out unarmed while Delilah's song continued, keeping Miller's attention split. The moment was chosen carefully, that gray time before sunrise when night vision was failing but daylight hadn't yet asserted itself, when tired men who had been watching all night would be at their least alert. "It's risky," Marshal Holloway acknowledged after hearing the plan, "but it might just work." When the eastern sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly, they moved into position. Delilah's heart pounded as she positioned herself near a window, waiting for her father's signal. When he nodded, she began to sing the same song her mother had taught her, about the prairie sky and finding home. Her voice, clear and strong despite her fear, carried into the pre-dawn stillness. The effect was immediate. Confused voices rose from Miller's camp, questioning the unexpected sound. Samuel seized the moment to step outside, hands raised, while Clayton and the marshal slipped through the cellar exit. "Miller," Samuel called out. "I'm here. Let the others go." Delilah continued singing, though every instinct screamed for her to run to her father. Through the window, She saw Miller and his men emerge from their positions, attention divided between Samuel and the source of the singing. What happened next unfolded in a chaotic sequence that would replay in Delilah's nightmares for months to come. Miller raised his gun towards Samuel just as Clayton and the marshal opened fire from their flanking positions. 2 of Miller's men fell immediately. A third returned fire wildly before being hit by the marshal. Miller himself managed to get off a shot that grazed Samuel's arm before Clayton's bullet found its mark. The final outlaw, seeing his companions fallen, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. In the sudden silence that followed, Delilah's song hung in the air for one suspended moment before she cut it off with a gasp and ran outside to her father. "Pa!" she cried, reaching him as he sank to his knees, clutching his arm. "Just a scratch," he assured her, though his face was alarmingly pale. "Told you it would work." Clayton was at their side in an instant, supporting Samuel as Marshal Holloway secured the surviving outlaw. "Let's get you inside. Get that arm looked at." By mid-morning, they had regrouped and tended to their wounds. Marshal Holloway had suffered a minor leg wound but insisted he could ride. Samuel's injury was indeed superficial, but the exertion had taken a visible toll on his already weakened body. "We need to get him to Tucson quickly," Delilah whispered to Clayton as they repacked their wagon. "He's worse than he's letting on." Clayton nodded grimly. "We'll make it, I promise." They reached Tucson 3 days later, pushing their pace as much as Samuel's condition would allow. The specialists confirmed what Samuel had already told them: his internal injuries were extensive and untreatable. He had months at most, perhaps only weeks. "I want to go home," Samuel said firmly after hearing the prognosis. Back to Silver Creek. The return journey was slower, more careful. Samuel rode in the wagon now, no longer able to sit a horse for long periods. Delilah stayed at his side, singing softly when the pain made him restless, telling him stories about the plans for the baby, describing the improvements they would make to the ranch in the coming year. They arrived home as autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and copper. The town turned out to welcome them, having heard of their encounter with Miller and his gang. Samuel, though visibly weakened, sat straighter in the wagon as they passed through the main street, acknowledging the cheers with a wave and a tired smile. In the weeks that followed, Samuel's decline accelerated. By November, he rarely left his bed, though he insisted on being carried to the porch on fair days to watch the changing landscape. Visitors came regularly, townspeople whose lives he had touched, old friends who had traveled upon hearing of his condition, even a journalist from back east hoping to record the final chapter of the singing gunfighter's legendary life. Through it all, Delilah sang for him daily, sometimes accompanied by Clayton on the guitar he had learned to play as a boy. The music seemed to ease Samuel's pain more effectively than the medicines the doctor provided, bringing light to his eyes even on his darkest days. One crisp December morning, as snow dusted the distant mountains, Samuel called them both to his bedside. "Got something for you," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. From beneath his pillow he withdrew a small leather pouch. "Been saving this. For the baby." Inside was a silver pendant, a small star with a pearl at its center, hanging from a delicate chain. "Was your mother's," Samuel explained. "Meant to give it to you on your wedding day but forgot in all the excitement. Figure it can be for my grandchild now." Delilah's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the precious gift. "It's beautiful, Pa." "One more thing," Samuel continued, his breathing labored. "Sing for me? One last time." Understanding what he was asking, understanding that this might truly be the last time, Delilah swallowed hard against the grief threatening to overwhelm her. Clayton moved to her side, his arm around her shoulders offering silent support. With love filling every note, Delilah sang her father's favorite song, the one about finding home beneath the prairie sky. As the final verse approached, Samuel's eyes drifted closed, a peaceful smile settling on his face. By the time the last note faded, he was gone. They buried Samuel Barton on a hillside overlooking the Eastwood ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree that caught the last rays of the setting sun. The entire town attended, standing silent as Clayton spoke of Samuel's courage, and Delilah, despite her advanced pregnancy and grief, sang a final farewell to the father who had given her so much. 2 weeks later, in the early hours of Christmas morning, Delilah gave birth to a son they named Samuel Clayton Eastwood. He arrived with a powerful set of lungs that the midwife declared was a voice to rival his grandfather's someday. As dawn broke over Silver Creek, Clayton carried their swaddled newborn to the window, showing him the first sunrise of his life. "Your grandfather would have loved you so much," he whispered to the tiny bundle. "But don't worry, we'll tell you all his stories, and your mother will sing you all his songs." From the bed, Delilah watched them silhouetted against the growing light, her husband and son, the new chapter of her life beginning even as another had closed. When Clayton turned to her, his eyes shining with wonder and love, she felt her heart expand with a joy that encompassed both her grief for her father and her hope for their future. "Sing for him?" Clayton asked softly, bringing their son back to her arms. "I think he'd like that." Delilah smiled through her tears, cradling her newborn close. "Pa always said he smiled bigger when I sang." And so, as the winter sun climbed higher over Silver Creek, Delilah sang to her son a lullaby about brave hearts and endless skies, about finding home in loving arms and carrying forward the melodies of those who came before. Outside their window, the world continued its eternal cycle of endings and beginnings, while within their small cabin, a new verse of an old song was just starting to be written.